And it's not so much a question of optimism or pessimism. It's just, again, a question of acceleration. AI can also do wonderful things for humanity. It can help us in healthcare, developing better medicines. It can help us in education. It can help us deal with climate change. It's just extremely powerful. And I think it's developing at a faster rate than I expected. When I wrote Homo Deus and 21 Lesson, I didn't think that in early 2023, AI would gain this kind of mastery of language so that it will be almost impossible to know whether a text or an image or a song has been composed by a human or by a machine.
Hi, welcome to the show. My pleasure to be here as your host. Just call me TaiwanPlus. This show is called InnoMinds, a forum for leaders in tech and politics to discuss how to solve today's problems with today's tools. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Yuval Noah Harari, a renowned historian who offers thought-provoking insights on the future of humanity, and Audrey Tang, Taiwan's digital minister. In this episode, we seek to understand how humans will cope with the rise of AI, what a real digital democracy could look like, and how to deal with common ethical questions in our century. Before we get started, I want to introduce our two guests today. Hailing from Israel, Professor Harari gained worldwide recognition in 2014 with the English translation of his book Sapiens, which tells the story of humankind from the Stone Age to the 21st century. His essay 21 Lessons for the 21st Century focuses on topics like the one we are discussing today, which is AI and its implications for democracy and authoritarianism. Harari is one of the major thinkers of our time, who sees the study of history as a way to broaden our perspectives and to make us become aware of possibilities we don't normally consider. Hi, Yuval.
Hello, it's good to be here and thank you for inviting me.
Audrey Tang is Taiwan's digital minister. She became Taiwan's youngest minister without portfolio in 2016 when she headed the public digital innovation space. She has been a hacktivist for over 2 decades. She is also a promoter of open source innovation. Hi, Audrey.
Hi, and hi, Harari. Good to catch up after 3 years now, after the pandemic.
To start things off, I want to ask, Harari, can you briefly comment on how you see AI as a part of human history and evolution?
Yeah, it's a completely new chapter in history, maybe even in the history of life on Earth, because AI is different from every previous invention in history, from every previous tool in history. All previous tools empowered humans because the decisions about how to use the tool were always left in the hands of human beings. When people invented stone knives, so you can use a knife to kill somebody, you can use a knife to save their life in surgery, or you can use the knife to cut salad. The decision is in the hands not of the knife, but of the human being. It's the same when people invented nuclear weapons, or nuclear energy in general. You can use nuclear energy to produce cheap electricity. You can use nuclear energy to destroy cities and countries. The decision is in human hands. But AI is different. AI is the first technology that can make decisions by itself. Therefore, there is a danger or possibility that it will take power away from us instead of empowering us. AI can make decisions about its own usage. It can also make decisions about our lives. Increasingly, when we apply for a loan to a bank or we apply to a job or whatever, it's an AI making the decisions about us. And AI is only making its very, very first steps. We haven't seen anything yet. So the big danger we are facing is that humans might lose control of the future to their own creation, which will turn out to be far more powerful than we are.
We are indeed embarking on a journey into uncharted territory. Audrey, can you briefly state whether you are supportive or skeptical of developments in AI?
Well, I support lowercase AI. which I call assistive intelligence. The kind of AI, like my eyeglasses, is transparent and accountable to the dignity of the humanity of human beings. Of course, if it's uppercase AI, sometimes called authoritarian intelligence, then I agree with Yuval that it can take agency away from people closer to suffering and end up letting just a few dictate the life of the many. And in a little bit like, I guess, coronavirus with gain-of-function research, I guess. There is also a more remote but still significant risk of AI just spiraling out of control. And so therefore, I think this kind of super uppercase full width AI, this is something that we're all very concerned about.
I see. Only time will tell whether we'll succeed in making AI a useful ally rather than an oppressive tool. Professor Harari, are these concerns the reason why you signed a petition in March 2023 to put a moratorium on the development of AI systems more powerful than GPT-4?
Because the development is moving so fast and the stakes are so high that we don't really understand what we are facing. I talked earlier about the ability of AI to take power away from us. Now, within a very few months, we saw that AI can also take culture away from us. All human culture, all human civilization is ultimately built on language, on what we are doing right now, having a conversation. Religion is based on stories that we tell each other and that we put in books. Politics is based on stories that politicians tell us and in conversations between citizens. Economics is also based ultimately on language. Money is just a story. For tens of thousands of years, humans ruled the world because we could cooperate better than any other entity on Earth, thanks to our ability to tell stories. If you want to have millions of people cooperating on something, you do it by telling them a story. And now, within just the last few weeks or months, AI has made this tremendous breakthrough of gaining mastery or partial mastery of human language, not just in words, but even also in images, in sounds, in music. Actually, you can't even be sure if what I'm saying right now and the images you now see on the screen, maybe it's not me, maybe it's an AI, maybe it's a fake video. A year ago, you could be sure, now you can't. What would it mean for AI to gain mastery of language, and with this potential mastery of politics, economics, religion? Maybe we'll see religions based on holy books written by a non-human intelligence. Now, there are so many different possibilities there, and we just need time to understand what we are facing and how to deal with it. We'll talk later about the specific dangers to democracy, which again, democracy ultimately is a conversation. What is a democracy? It's lots of people coming together, talking to each other in order to reach some decision, some consensus, instead of having a dictator telling everybody what to do. It's a conversation. Conversation is based on language. When AI hacks language, it could destroy democracy. So we need time to understand all this and to adapt. And for that, we need just to slow down. That's the most basic request. Please slow down so we have the time to understand and to adapt.
From what I've just heard, it's essential for us to slow down and ponder the ramifications of our inventions. Given the precarious position we are in now, do you hold a pessimistic view towards the future of humanity?
And it's not so much a question of optimism or pessimism. It's just, again, a question of acceleration. AI can also do wonderful things for humanity. It can help us in healthcare, developing better medicines. It can help us in education. It can help us deal with climate change. It's just extremely powerful. And I think it's developing at a faster rate than I expected. When I wrote Homo Deus and 21 Lesson, I didn't think that in early 2023, AI would gain this kind of mastery of language so that it will be almost impossible to know whether a text or an image or a song has been composed by a human or by a machine.
Audrey, you were a freelance digital advisor involved in artificial intelligence projects. How has this professional experience shaped your view on AI, and what are your thoughts on Yuval's predictions?
Yeah, it's true that between 2010 and 2016, right before I entered the cabinet, I worked closely with the Siri team at Apple on conversational AI. And in particular, I work on cloud language localization, meaning that we bring this kind of interactive conversation assistive intelligence to people who speak not the majority languages, but lower resource languages, languages with fewer people speaking. And even then, we saw that indeed, if Siri only speaks in English or Mandarin and not making any effort to communicate in other languages, it can actually create epistemic linguistic injustice to people, because they then will have to force themselves to speak those languages. The other thing was that if Siri causes harm by hallucinating, right, by just making stuff up instead of looking up on Wikipedia or Warfarin Alpha or other more trustworthy tools, then it can also damage the fabric of trust, because there are people who just simply believe whatever their personal assistant, in this case Siri, says, and just relay that information as if that information comes from that person. And so if people keep doing that, and if Siri doesn't have quality assurance checks, then it causes something like the CFCs, the freons, caused to the ozone layer last century, around 70s, 80s, because then the information ecosystem will be populated by this semi-true, true sounding, but not actually true information, and people will just lose confidence in online interaction altogether. So we did think about that 2010 to 2016 a lot. And nowadays, it seems like what we were worrying about is very quickly, as Yuval said, accelerating into reality now, because without advanced digital signature systems, indeed, the interactive deepfakes, nobody can tell whether this image comes from Audrey or not. And if we end up to the state where we only trust the people physically in the same room are people, then we lose the fabric of trust that enable international coordination to, for example, solve things like climate change or pandemic.
When we talk about the future of AI, we tend to forget that this revolution is not just about software, it's about hardware as well. Audrey, could you tell us more about the role Taiwan plays in the supply chain of hardware for AI?
Well, it's relatively well known that the most advanced chips are produced mostly by TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductor Company. And of course, MediaTek, Foxconn, and so on are all major players in the productions of not just semiconductors and processors, but also the electronic components that are essential to the AI technologies. And moreover, we're also working with the entire supply chain to democratize the AI use in the language models, for example, so that we call this edge computing or AI on chip, so that you can run a reduced and therefore not as powerful in creating deepfakes, but still very useful way to, for example, understanding human speech closer to the device. So you do not have to send those sensitive or confidential information to the so-called cloud, that's to say other people's computer, but rather these edge AI systems can help people to, for example, translate between different language and so on, closer to the components. And because Taiwan excels in chip making and quick iteration on deploying those chips into the field like autonomous vehicles and so on, we have a pretty robust ecosystem to make these narrow AI application work in a very quick fashion. But with that experience, of course, we're now turning our eyes on general purpose AI, which, as Yuval said, carries a very much larger risk area than those narrow AI industries that Taiwan is more known at.
Yuval, what about the role of Israel in the global development of AI?
Yeah, even though it's a very small country, it plays a significant role. There are many research centers here. It also plays an oversized role in the specific areas of cyber weapons, surveillance technology. This is because, of the military involvement of Israel. and also of the occupied territories. Unfortunately, we have a lot of experience in using AI in order to control millions of people against their will. And also, unfortunately, my country or companies in my country have been exporting these sometimes dangerous technologies to regimes, including undemocratic regimes, in many other places around the world. So like almost every few months, you have this new scandal of an Israeli company that turns out it sold new software capabilities to some regime in order to spy on journalists or on human rights activists or to meddle in national and local elections, which again shows us the developments in this global age and with this kind of global technology, developments in one country can spill over to many other countries. And Israel right now is also in a very difficult situation of the government trying to take over the judiciary system, gain unlimited power for itself, and basically turn Israel into a dictatorship in which the government can pass any law it wants and even rig the elections without any checks and balances. So the combination of these very powerful technologies and AI tools with a regime that has no limits on its power can have very dangerous implications, not only for people within our own borders, but also for many other areas across the world.
The subject at hand is quite serious. Do you believe that the advancement of technology is closely intertwined with the future of our political systems?
You know, democracy always depends on technology. This is something that is often not obvious to people, but it's a very plain historical fact. Before the modern era, we have no examples whatsoever of a large-scale democracy. We have a lot of examples from democracies in the ancient world, but they are all very small-scale and local. Most hunter-gatherer bands and tribes had a more democratic political system. It was quite rare to have a dictator in a small band when people can, you know, everybody knows each other, everybody trusts each other. It's not a good place to have a dictatorship. But when human societies began to grow, and you have big cities and kingdoms, and the kingdoms also get bigger, then democracy becomes almost impossible, and dictatorship becomes or one sort or the other of an autocratic regime becomes the universal norm. Why? Because you can't have a public conversation about politics in a large territory with hundreds of thousands or millions of people. In a small city like ancient Athens, or in a hunter-gatherer tribe, everybody can meet, know each other, have a discussion, and decide what to do about war and peace, about economics, whatever. In a large kingdom, it was impossible. So we don't have any examples of a large-scale democracy until the emergence of modern communication and information technology in the 18th and 19th century, first with print and newspapers, then with telegraph and radio and television and so forth. And this, for the first time, made it possible for millions of people spread over a large territory to have a political conversation, to develop trust, and to think together or discuss together what to do about the major issues of the day. In this sense, democracy depends on technology. And every major change in communication and information technology in the last 200 years also led to a change in the practices, in the nature of democracy. So what we are going through right now fits this pattern, that we are now in the midst of another major revolution in communication and information technology, and it is bound to change democracy. The worst case scenario is that it will destroy democracy, because new information technologies can undermine the ability to have a conversation and to have trust between people, and can instead empower totalitarian regimes that are also dependent on technology. In the ancient world, the people had many autocratic regimes, but they could never establish a totalitarian regime. The difference between autocracy and totalitarianism is that autocracy, there is all the political power is concentrated in the hands of a small elite of one emperor, but they don't intervene in the daily life of most people because they can't. If you sit in the capital city of the Chinese Empire, you cannot know what each individual is doing in every remote village of the empire. So they live most of their life without your control. Totalitarianism became possible only, again, in the 20th century because of the same information and communication technologies that also enabled democracy. The same tools of print and radio and telephone and all this, it also enabled somebody in Beijing or Moscow or Berlin in the time of Nazi Germany to know what each person is doing in each remote village and try to control that. And this is the big question we now face with AI and with all the other new information technology. Will we know how to utilize them to strengthen democracy and create digital democracies? Or will they lead to the emergence of digital dictatorships, which will be far worse, even the Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union?
That was very insightful. It leads me to another question. Do you think authoritarian states will gain the upper hand in the AI race?
Well, they have an advantage and a disadvantage. Because the new technology, especially AI, makes it possible to concentrate a lot of information in one place and analyze it efficiently in one place, this could make authoritarian and totalitarian regimes even stronger than before. But they also have a disadvantage, which is they don't usually have strong self-correcting mechanisms. The emperor that controls everything is a human being. No human being likes to admit mistakes. When you're a totalitarian ruler, you use all your power to shirk responsibility. If you make a mistake, let's say in how you deal with an epidemic, or you decide to invade, like Putin decides to invade Ukraine, and it's a terrible mistake, you never admit the mistake. There is no power in the country that can hold you responsible. There is no independent media. There is no independent political parties. There are no independent courts. So within the country, nobody holds you to account. And you use your control of the media, of the political system, of the courts, to put the blame on somebody else. There are enemies. There are traitors. And you demand even more power for yourself to deal with these so-called enemies and traitors. So authoritarian and totalitarian regimes, when they make a mistake, they usually only amplify it. Democracy's big advantage is that when the government makes a mistake, the journalists expose it, the courts can take action, there are elections, you can change the government. So democracies are better at correcting their own mistakes. Now, AI also makes mistakes. AI is not infallible. One of the dangers we face with totalitarian regimes is that they will create this super totalitarian regime based on AI, which will make mistakes, and they will have no mechanism to correct these mistakes. And this can be disastrous for the country itself. And if the country is very powerful, this could be disastrous for the whole of humankind.
Audrey, what might the democratic counterpart to what Yuval just described look like?
Yeah, so in the last century, in 1980s, the 80s saw the idea of personal computing, where a person has a computer that works to the benefit of that person without the more classical mainframe, or nowadays we'll call it cloud computing. As a metaphor, that's the distinction between my eyeglass, which again, as I mentioned, helps me see things better, but it's entirely accountable to me, versus a camera that takes everything that I see, send it to some cloud somewhere for it to be processed and sent back to my retina, right? In which case, of course, that totalitarian apparatus on the cloud would also have a copy of whatever I was seeing, and maybe keeping it in perpetuity in a record somewhere to do accurate precision persuasion technology on me, right? So this idea of personal computing, while relatively new, is actually very powerful. It enabled people to come to terms with technology for themselves. Like I have on this laptop some assistive intelligence that help me to transcribe everything that I have said. But I can rest assured that it works without an internet connection, that it will not send anything that I say to anywhere else, and so on. And so in Taiwan, personal computing grew in tandem with our democracy. It enabled journalists to do what we call data journalism nowadays, to analyze the governmental records independently and so on. It also enabled new ways of social organization, because on each laptop and each desktop computer, people can host bulletin board systems, places of gathering, and you just need a telephone connection and a modem, and everybody can dial to your personal computer from their personal computer and form a small internet of like-minded people to talk about democracy and so on. And that fits a bill of the kind of a public square, and like in ancient Athens, right, around 100 people or so, at most 1,000 people or so, know each other pretty well in these smaller gatherings. So I would say that Taiwan's history of democratization depends on this kind of grassroots assemblies of personal computing together, instead of this like flatten everything on this cloud-based social media. We're much more comfortable with this kind of grassroots organization, and that is the main difference of our democracy versus the previous century ones.
Could you provide more insights on how AI can contribute to democracy?
Well, there are, of course, authoritarian, even totalitarian use of AI. I'm not denying that. I'm just saying that the kind of AI that I deploy on my laptop here is not that sort of AI. It is rather the assistive sort of AI. And you can easily tell the difference in how the harm is redressed, right? If my eyeglass breaks, I can just fix it manually with some super glue. I actually just did that a couple of weeks ago, and I know exactly how it works. And if I have a glass repair friend down the street that I trust, I can also hand an eyeglass to them without, signing this NDA and paying a huge amount of license fees or something like that. But if this is not accountable to me, then I actually cannot seek redress for the harm that it causes when I wear it. Maybe it's so addictive and sticky that I cannot take it out, right? So basically, you can very easily see the difference between assistive intelligence versus authoritarian ones in whenever there is harm. Does the harm gets fixed, redressed in the here and now? Or is it redressed only after a lot of appeal, or even there's no way to seek redress to the harm?
Professor Harari, I want to pass the question to you. Do you believe that AI could actually improve liberal democracy?
Yes, it certainly can. I mean, as I said before, democracy is based on technology. When we have better technology, it is possible to have better democracy. But unfortunately, it is also possible to have more powerful totalitarian regimes. So ultimately, it's a question of not the technology itself, but the decisions that we make about how to use the technology.
Yuval, you often talk about hackable humans. Do you think AI could hack the youth to actually go vote?
Yes, but unfortunately, it can hack people to do all kinds of things. To vote, not to vote for this candidate, for that candidate. Over the last 10 years, we saw with social media the immense power of very primitive AI. Because there was AI in social media, but it didn't produce the content. I mean, all the videos, all the texts, it's humans were producing them. The AI only decided, in many cases, what to show you at what moment, or what to show to what person. And even though this was a very primitive AI, it was still extremely powerful, and it completely changed the political landscape. Many experts believe that what we see in many countries, including my own, of political polarization, the breakdown of democratic conversation, is to a large extent the result of these primitive AI, which were given the task of increasing the time users spend on the platform, because this is how the companies make money. And they did it by flooding people with videos and texts that made people angry and fearful and hateful, because this is the way to grab their attention. There was a battle for attention. Now with the new generation of AI, the battlefront is shifting from attention maybe to intimacy. You know, the most powerful way to get to know somebody and also to persuade them to change their minds about something is through an intimate relationship. Now, previously in history, nobody could form such relationships other than human beings or animals like your dog. AI couldn't do it, computers couldn't do it. Now they can, because most relationships are based on language. And we can now see a new generation of bots, armies of bots, who are busy not in diverting our attention, but in creating intimate relationships with us. You know, you go online, you spend hours, maybe days and weeks, talking with someone, forming a relationship. You're convinced this someone is a human being, but actually it's an AI that gets to know you and then uses it to gradually and subtly influence your political views. So it could influence you to go vote or to not vote, or to vote for this or that candidate. And this is extremely dangerous. Again, if we allow something like that to happen, for companies and political parties to basically mass produce intimacy using AI, this will destroy the foundation of human society, which is based ultimately on intimate relations between people. And it will also be extremely harmful to human psychology. Just imagine what it means that increasingly many of your most important relations are with AIs.
This definitely sheds light on the intricate situation we face today. Thank you to Professor Harari and Audrey for joining us. We've been talking about the implications of artificial intelligence for humanity and contemporary democratic systems. In the next episode, we'll discuss liberalism, AI ethics, and possible solutions for making the most of the digital revolution. And if you like today's episode, be sure to subscribe, share, and let us know what you think. See you next time on Innovative Minds.
And we should also remember that as far as we know, AI itself cannot suffer. It has no, as far as we know, it has no consciousness, it has no feelings, it can't feel pain or pleasure or love or fear. So it's a tool that could have a huge impact on sentient beings, but it is not sentient itself. Of course, the whole discussion will completely change if and when AI becomes conscious and becomes an ethical agent. Hello, I'm Professor Yuval Harari. See you on TaiwanPlus.
Hello, I'm Audrey Tang, Taiwan's digital minister. See you on TaiwanPlus.